Thanks, Amanda. Obviously, we're trying to stick to time, so I'll just skip into this first slide. I guess the point of this presentation is in some ways to remind people of who the organics industry thought we were and think we still are, what markets we're in. I want to talk about regulations. I want to talk a bit about risk, and then really finish up with some issues that I think we're facing that we need to be considering, and a bit of sort of where to, if you like. For those of you who don't know much about our sector, we are remarkably uncomplicated, really. We are horticultural products manufacturers. That's how we used to be seen, and that's how we want to be seen. We make soil mixes and mulches and composts. We supply them just about to anyone who wants to grow something and eat or garden or whatever. That's who we're supposed to be. We've had some standards. That's where we were. I just put a note down the bottom because I found parts of yesterday interesting. I heard the word product in the first panel session. The word product must have been used 50 times. I doubt it's been used 50 times in the last 10 conferences. And it's interesting that now people are talking about, if you like, the circular economy and products. And it's something that we've been doing for a very, very long time. And just to give you a bit of history around that, we were the first state association, if you like, around compost. So we started in about 96. And that's when green waste really started to move in the state, in the late 90s. It really started with a very simple, what I guess we now would call a circular economy idea, which we certainly didn't 20-something years ago. That Garden to Garden logo was very simple. And again, it's uncomplicated. It's a great message. It comes out of your garden, you compost it, you put it back in. Now, that held us in very good stead. That compost, that sort of strategy for our industry held us in very good stead for a long time. We sort of became part of Compost Australia, so we evolved and we were linked to what was then the Waste Management Association. That had with it some issues that I think everyone understands. That concept of waste, which certainly for our sector, we never considered ourselves a waste sector, ever. Ever. We were horticultural products manufacturers. That's who we are. And so we had this real issue about being linked to an association. Nothing wrong with the association itself, as you know, everyone needs an association. But it was waste, and it turned our membership from a group of hort manufacturers to hort manufacturers and essentially the waste industry. And that created some underlying problems, you know, getting up to 15, 16, 17 years ago. We sort of evolved out of that into AORA. And just so, because I'm going to talk about the AWT material, obviously, just on AORA, I would ask people to understand that association, which moved away from the Waste Management Association, moved to de-link ourselves to waste. The funding from that came from two businesses. One was ANL and one was Resource Recovery, which is Paul's. So one's a source-separated business and one's an AWT business. So it's not that we hate each other. It was an absolute understanding that we need an industry association, and so two sort of parts of the industry funded it. Paul's business is a stone's throw down the road. In fact, I might chuck a few stones at it on the way home, actually. When you look at the AORA website, so we don't want stuff buried. We're sort of moving towards we're not waste, we're not waste, we're not waste, and getting into agriculture. That's, in simple terms, where we are. I won't spend too much time here, but everyone should know, certainly with ANL, we're market-driven, we're product and market-driven. You grow it, you turf it, you do something with it, we'll supply it to you. But we are very much ag-focused and have been for sort of 15 years because that's where we see the tonnes going. In terms of supply, which is where things start to get probably a little bit messy, we handled what at the time weren't considered waste, but they were the byproducts of forestry. In the mid to late 90s, the talk of banning green waste to landfill just popped tonnes out of the woodwork everywhere, certainly in New South Wales. So come 2004, our industry actually put to government a joint industry statement. We were doing about 1.34 thousand tonnes in the Greater Sydney region. We felt at the time that we had almost exhausted the uptake within the urban markets. The government wanted to double tonnes within 4 years, which we were happy, you know, gate fees and markets and volume, so we were happy with that. But what we absolutely believed was to move those tonnes, we had to build very quickly ag markets. So that was a given, and we've been banging on about that for a long time. Probably the unfortunate thing is that around about the same time, from my perspective, at around about the same time, which was 2004, the first AWT business got up in Sydney. 5 years after that, for people who were up here at COFS, so this is a decade ago now, at this conference there were some differences of opinion between the source-separated industry and the AWT industry. And I'm glad I kept my notes from that session because it was a little bit of an ugly year, that one. And the comments that were made, so it was a morning panel session, the comments that were made is that it was the future of alternate waste technology, and the one that I particularly liked, which was Ron Wainberg, it's a shame, I don't know if Ron's here, it's a bit of a shame if he's not, who was then the head of WAMA, that we used to be primitive in terms of our organics management, and now it's a sophisticated high-tech industry. As one of the primitives, I'd have to say we did take a little bit of offence at that. And then a year later, so this was all about should we land apply this stuff. A year later, agriculture, which was going to be the heart of our sort of growing markets, was a market for that material. Now, I'm sorry, and we are sorry. I don't care what anyone says. That is not a product. It is not a product. And we have collectively failed our own industry, and I mean us as well, because we should have fought a fight that was much better than we fought. We've let that go into the market. Now, we didn't want to see those businesses kneecapped, but equally, we should have managed that as an industry better. And I think, if nothing else, we need to accept that we need to learn from things like that. The consequences of the ban have been very significant for our sector. And I know they say any publicity is good publicity. That's crap. This was not good publicity. The other thing that came up was clearly there was uncertainty and sympathy, and I've got great sympathy for local government, the contracts. It must have been a very hard time, and I totally accept that. There was also a lot of sympathy for the AWT processes, and from a business perspective, we would agree with that. No one wants to see massive investment kneecapped the way that in some ways it has been. But I would remind people that we have been doing this, the source-separated industry has been doing this for 30 years. I would also like to remind you that we've been trying to build these markets for 30 years. We needed this like a frontal lobotomy. I mean it, we just cannot have that sort of impact on what is essentially the heart of the resource recovery industry. You take organics out of our targets and we're going to have some problems. The knock-on of that was a whole bunch of farms got contacted, as they should be. 500 farmers, they've got 5 neighbours, so before you knew it, 3,000 broad-acre people were aware of this problem. It took us back to garbage from Sydney, which is where we were, 10 years ago. So I must admit, it doesn't bring me great joy having to say this, but equally, we can't forget it. We have to learn from where we've been. In terms of regulation, when you look at where we were, the biosols guidelines have been in place now for a quarter of a century. That in essence for our industry has been the underlying regulation that we've had for 25 years up until the change in the Act. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So we basically had no other regulation until the 2005. We then got into the we're all waste sort of sector. So if you drive into any landscape yard with 100 bins, every bin now is essentially waste, and that is a concern that we've got to address. The resource recovery exemptions, they've been problematic. The MWU, AWT, whatever you want to call it, with its 3 revisions was a problem, and I think we've all got to acknowledge that. So it has been it's been difficult, certainly for industry, and I've got no doubt I wouldn't want to be a regulator, I can tell you, because those conversations would have been unhappy. Just one point that if people aren't aware, the biosolids guidelines are currently under review, and that's significant. In terms of what has worked, look, I'm biased. We are a biosolids company. We're composters and land appliers, so take it for what it is. However, that is a 25-year regulation. That has held us in very good stead in the market for a quarter of a century. It has become the primary sort of document that's led into other regulations. The thing that I liked about it, the process development of that, I thought was really sound. So it was inclusive, so everyone got in the room to fight, as we do. There were American regs, so we had something to work to. There was a whack of money spent on actually understanding when you land apply it, what happens in the soil, into the crop, into the meat. Rates and restrictions were set around it. They set that thing in place, and we're still doing it now under the same regs. That's a good process, and it's held us in good stead. This hasn't been a good process. We started with a regulation that allowed us in non-contact agriculture to apply 5 teaspoons of glass and almost half a square metre of plastic per square metre. Every time I look at it, I just can't believe that we let ourselves do that. It's been a frustration. Now I get, someone's got, I might add, that's in agriculture. Multiply that by 14 for a mine site. In fact, multiply it by 14 and double it. And I think there is still a consideration that maybe the material will go back to mine site. And I don't want to see those guys destroyed, but equally, you take that slide earlier and multiply the contamination by 14. Is that a good thing? Should we be putting it anywhere? I don't know. In terms of regulatory issues, I think are we waste or are we product? We've had this sort of argument for too long. We've got to stop that. There has to be a process, and that was the other thing that sort of struck me yesterday. The waste industry has finally realised that it's not about taking a waste, rearranging it into another bunch of wastes and sending it out the gate. The idea is take the waste, make a product and sell it. Our sector's been doing this for a long time. It fascinates me that there's so much talk about the circular economy, because that's really how the organic sector started. There are certainly issues with consistency of regulations. I won't go into the details, but I do think that there is, data's been mentioned. Mike this morning, he's a data hound. I think we do lack some data around regulations that probably need to be fixed. And I'll just mention Molly, because I really liked Molly's conversation yesterday. She talked about inclusion and genuine collaborative consultation. I think it doesn't matter where you go around the country, there is a feeling that perhaps we haven't been inclusive and collaborative, and we've got to get sort of past that. In terms of risk, we are in a different world now, and some people would have seen these. In the 50s we had incinerators at Mossman. It's probably on a Mark Standbacks, he's keen to burn. We had landfills on the northern beaches, so that's in my lifetime. It's quite shocking. We've had these open outfills, these deep ocean outfalls. So we've moved from that in my lifetime, and I'm young-ish, to PFAS, which is sort of bouncing around in the news at the moment. I'm just going to run quickly through a few of these because there are issues in the market, but I think we need to understand perspective, and I think there has been a bit of a loss of perspective around risk. PFAS hit the news. They were talking about don't grow vegetables in the soil, don't eat the vegetables, it's bad. And I'm not saying there isn't any risk, don't get me wrong. But in the 1970s, 3M started checking human blood samples looking for PFAS. That's 40 years ago, whatever it is. They could not find a nil result in blood samples, so that in the population. So they had to go back to retained samples from early in the Vietnam War, which is pre-Tupperware and pre all of that, to actually find blood samples that didn't have it. Now that can't be good, but equally, do we ban? How do we manage that, and where is the relative risk? And just to go on from that, that's a more recent one. So these have come from Sally Brown. I'll mention Sally in a minute, who's a gem. Just to put it in perspective, that was a biosolids farm. So all that is showing is, either with the water or the biosolids or the soil, in relative terms looking for PFAS in the soils. That's the relative find in the soil against the same farmer's house and the dust in his house, the carpet dust in his house. Is it good? No, but we do need to keep perspective. Just one more, antimicrobials. And the reason for looking at this is there are going to be a bunch of things that the EPA will look at in terms of regulation. And I don't know if this is in there or not. Okay. But again, it wasn't in the material that was used. If you take the detection limits and apply it to the actual crop that's grown in it, to get the same amount of that antimicrobial that's in brushing your teeth twice a day, you've got to eat 4 tonnes of spuds. So we do need to, keep it in perspective. I'm going to have to rip through this. Sally Brown's got a really nice approach. We've got to take some of the concern out of all of this, manage the risk, but be practical about it. Getting stuff back into the soil is a very good thing. It's how we manage all the risks. Two things. The biosoils guidelines are being reviewed. They are intrinsically linked to everything else we do because they've been around so long. When they change, which inevitably they will, we just need to be conscious of the knock-on through everything we do. Harps is an interesting one. So that's basically all the food that the Coles and Woolies will sell. Recently, because of the listeria scare in Queensland, they have now set essentially a 1-year withholding period. So if you use manure to grow vegetables, you can't sell it to someone for a year, which destroys that market. It's a short step from there to our industry. I'm going to forget that one. Just some things to consider. We need to work out how risk is managed. The process around that needs to be very public for all of us to work in. We need consultation and we need a process. The South Australians, I think, are good. So they've got an engagement strategy that's at high level. They meet every couple of months. You have a forum in which to raise issues, and it's a level where that actually gets a chance to filter down through all of us. We do need a system that gives social conscience and confidence, and we've got to communicate and collaborate. Those words have come up a lot in the last couple of days as well around the country, so that would suggest that we haven't been collaborative, and that's it. So thank you.